it's not 9 o'clock yet, but I wanted to start a little bit early tonight because I have a feeling the show might go a little bit long tonight when we start talking about what we're going to talk about tonight. So, hey everybody, welcome to another episode of What the Fuck Paranormal Chat with a Naked Bigfoot. I am your host, Mike the Naked Bigfoot. Want to thank everybody who is tuning in live tonight. I want to thank everybody who watches the replay later, because I think you're going to find this episode really, really intriguing. Really, really intriguing. It's going to be a lot of fun. Hey, Sherry. I rarely get the opportunity to well, in my travels and my explorations and my investigations and so on and so forth. Hey everybody who's just popping in. Thank you for coming on tonight. We're just starting the show a little bit early as always. We haven't gotten to the meat of the show yet, so you have not missed anything yet. Just me and my usual first few minutes of babbling. But like I was saying, I very rarely get the chance. I very rarely have the opportunity to explore a site, a true crime site, where murders took place that also involved the supernatural and paranormal at the same time. And it's a very, very rare convergence of things like that one can encounter out there that has any validity to it. So I'm really excited about tonight's episode. So heavy metal, Papa Joy, hey everybody, welcome. You have not missed anything yet. This is just the opening salvo. I started a little bit early, I know. Because I wanted to, again, I'll repeat, I started a little bit early because the show might go a little bit long, because I want to work in as much as I can. It's going to be a really fun show. It's going to be a really fun show tonight. Again, it has everything. This show tonight, it has true crime. It has corrupt government officials. It's corruption. Has wild rumors and accusations. It has a curse involved in it. And even more astounding, it also has Satan. And we all know what the Naked Bigfoot thinks about the concept of Satan. So he will not go into that tonight. He will avoid that. He will also avoid talking about himself in the third person from here on out. Okay, guys, before we start the show, let me give the obligatory how the show is run. Most of you are aware of how the show is run and how I run the show. I am not here to persuade, dissuade, change your mind, change your religion, harm you physically, mentally, or spiritually in any way. What the Fuck Paranormal Chat was created to be both entertaining and informative. And if you leave from watching any of my shows, including the one tonight, with a sudden curiosity about this wild and strange world that we live in, paranormally speaking, supernaturally speaking, and want to go out and explore it, then I feel like I have done my job. But the only thing I do ask you is to use most of my adventures as cautionary tales. If you go out to explore this insanely crazy and fun supernatural and paranormal world that we live in, understand that when I did it, it took me a long time to realize how much danger I'd put myself into in a lot of different situations. And if I had to do it all over again, I probably would do it the same way. But I'd probably take a few extra precautions and not think of myself as invulnerable. So if you do go out, please explore and investigate safely and sanely. Also, on all of our shows, we play. Oh, before I go to the game, I always have to explain the game. Before I go to the game, I almost forgot because there are tonight's subject matter is, I know my show is, I label it as not for anybody under the age of 18. Tonight's show is especially going to be that way because it does involve murder. Um, it involves drugs, murder, all sorts of things. But also, I will be peppering my story with various curse words. So, if you have any small children in the room and you do not wish for them to learn any new curse words, fuck, shit, damn, what the fuck, things like that, then title of the show, then please ask them to leave the room, put them to bed, wear headphones so they cannot hear what is being said. If it offends you, I will not apologize because the language that I use is part of my vernacular. But I do implore you to don't be turned off by it and turn my show off. Because if you can overlook those flaws in my character, you will discover a wealth of knowledge and entertainment. um, Also, more importantly, deep breath, deep breath. We play a drinking game on my show. A lot of a lot of the people who follow the show with any kind of regularity know that we always play the drinking game. The drinking game is a lot of fun when you play it live, but if you're watching the replay, I encourage you to watch it with friends. So you can, and then so if you want to play the drinking game, you can play the drinking game because people have a lot of fun with the drinking game, especially when I tell you the rules of the drinking game. It's a lot of fun. Um, every time you hear me say the following phrase in some format, that is a story for another day, or that is a story for another time. Please take a sip of your or sip or shot of your adult beverage of choice. If you do not imbibe adult beverages but still wish to play the drinking game tonight, I encourage you to drink your beverage of choice, whether it be water, tea, coffee, whatever non-alcoholic beverage you wish to indulge in. If you are indulging in adult beverages, by the end of this show, I guarantee you will probably be drunk as fuck. So, or really tipsy. So I do ask. I sincerely ask, and that you do not drink and drive. Do not drink and drive. Do not drink and drive. Um, Call an Uber, call Lyft if that's still a thing. Crash on the couch, crash on your friend's couch. Just don't drink and drive and take care of yourself, okay? Oh, and for all of my fans of my various haunted objects, I've been giving hints and sneak previews that there will be a haunted object tonight that's connected to this story. I've already taken it out of its secure location. And it is a secure location. My son actually caught me at the cabinet where everything's locked up in. And he looked at me and he went, "Dad, what the fuck are you taking out of that cabinet?" Because they know what's in the cabinet. Okay, my family knows what's in that cabinet. Um, it's the big black cabinet of bad things. Not everything is bad, but everything in that cabinet is spiritually charged, as a lot of you well know, is spiritually charged in one way or another. Either it's actually, it just, either it gives off energy, supernatural energy, paranormal energy, or it acts as a conduit, uh, a spiritual conduit, or a spirit is attached to the object in question. Um, Thank you for asking, Christine. If anybody saw the ritual episode, my pinky got dislocated during the ritual, and my thumb got really, really burned. Really, really burned. You'll see me putting my hand on my head constantly, because when I'm in pain, I do that. I put my hand on my head. Managed to get my finger fixed. It was not broken. It's not broken. And my thumb has blistered up in several spots. But there is no lasting harm. Um, it will, you know, it'll take care of itself. That will not be the thing that takes me off the planet. There's a few blisters and a dislocated finger. That will not be the things that take me off this planet. So, but thank you for asking. For anybody who has not watched the episode prior to this that I did, a surprise episode, I have been asked on several occasions, requested, people, and also had people that were curious about about some of the rituals that I conducted as a voodoo priest. That I recorded a live one last night, which I was asking this very annoying negative spirit that's been negative spiritual entity, I should put it, has been plaguing our farm. Um, I asked that he be removed, um, or it be removed. And it seems like it seems like my request was granted, because it's been a very quiet day on the farm today. Very, very, like fucking grave quiet, and it's scary quiet, on the farm. If you watch the episode, for those who haven't watched the episode called a ritual, um, and you see the comments that are being made right now by people in the chat. When you watch the episode, you'll understand the comments. If you choose to watch the episode, you'll understand the comments. But I will warn you. You know the movie The Ring. That when you watch this cursed movie, that it would affect you. You would die. But the episode called A Ritual, that's before this, it's kind of, think of it as a Ring video. A ring like that. But you won't die from watching it. But shit will happen to you from watching it. It's some people who, if you've ever wanted to have a paranormal or supernatural encounter that didn't involve life or limb, and involve you dying or having your arms or legs hacked off or mauled or possession. If you wanted to have an experience, and you may want to watch that episode. So I'll just put that out there, because you will have you more than likely will have some kind of experience from watching it. But if you watch the episode, I explain what the experience more than likely will entail. So without giving too much away. Okay. Well, it looks like it's time to move on. Had a great sleep. That's good. That's good. I'm glad you had a great sleep. Gods know I wanted you to have a great sleep after that episode. Um, because I didn't. I wanted somebody to cut my hand off that night because it hurt so fucking bad. Um, okay. But as always, that is a story for another time. So I will have to save. Um, oh, shit. I will have to save that story for another time completely. Give you more details about it later. Okay, on with tonight's tale. Now, the way I'm going to structure tonight's tale is that I am going to tell you the story. The background story, of course. And I'll end it with how I became part of the story. Oh, fuck. I don't know what that is, but it feels like I want to barf. I ate too much goat today. Okay, tonight's tale takes place, of course, in the South. As you know, a lot of my tales take place in the South. A lot of my stories take place in the South. But this takes place in a very rural part of Georgia. Um, it's called Chattooga, Georgia. Well, Chattooga County, Georgia. Um, at the time that this story takes place. Ooh, don't want to barf. And at the time in which I came into the story, Chattooga County was a small county. It was a small town. It was a small southern town, small southern county. Um, which I have to emphasize that so you'll understand. It was an agrarian community. People hunted, they fished off the land for sustenance, just not for sport. Um, they still do, from what I understand. Uh, they had still general stores, hardware stores. Everything was mom and pop and family run and family. You know, everybody knew everybody else there. It was that kind of county, that kind of town. Everyone knew everybody else. Um, it was about as yep, the goat soup. Ate a lot of goat soup tonight. I actually got a really good appetite after lunch today. Damn it! I'm getting distracted. That's a story for another time. Fuck, fuck, fuck. Don't get me talking about goat soup tonight. It was good. It was very good goat soup. Um, the time that this tale took began, there was a doctor, Dr. Scudder, uh, and his housekeeper, Mr. Odom, his housekeeper and lifetime companion. Dr. Scudder was from Chicago. You know, he was a professor, an accomplished harpist, um, and a lover of the arts. Was always described as being by the people by his he I believe he taught it if I remember correctly. So please bear with me. Um, he taught at Loyola University. He was a professor there. Uh, his other professor, the people that his co-workers always described him as being very eccentric, very nice guy. Everybody loved him. Everybody loved his life partner, Mr. Odom. If I can't remember a name, you're going to hear me call them Mr. and Mrs. So I'm sorry if I can't remember their first name. Him and Mr. Odom again. Mr. Odom being his housekeeper and also was his lifetime partner. This took place. This was about the mid to late 70s in Chicago, where being Chicago, it was a bit more accepted to be openly gay. But you have to remember, this was a time, broadly speaking, this was a time where it was not generally outside of academic circles and some social circles, it was not considered very safe and very safe to be openly gay. And these two gentlemen were. But again, they were from Chicago and lived in and around Chicago and heavily involved in the arts and with the community there. Everybody loved them. Everybody enjoyed them. They were great people to be around. Again, Dr. Scudder was always considered a bit eccentric, a little nutty. But you'd have to be a college professor. You got to be a little bit off. And again, this was the 70s. Peace and free love and drugs, and that will come into. You'll understand why I said that a little bit later. Well, Dr. Scudder and Mr. Odom eventually got to the point where Dr. Scudder got tired of the politics of academia, of dealing with the politics and the attitudes and the egos of the people that he worked with and worked around. And him and Mr. Odom, they always had a dream of living in the country, having a country home, living off the grid, so to speak, having living deep into the woods and growing their own food, and just having a simpler life together. So, and I believe, please, if I am correct, it was around 1972. They bought a 40-acre tract of land in the hills of Chattooga County, Georgia. And they used their entire life savings. They used every dime they had saved up to buy this land and invested it in building a house there. They packed up everything in a camper and drove down to their new property and proceeded to start building. Now, they built it themselves. They built it by hand. They laid every brick by hand. And by some estimates, they laid about 50,000 bricks in building this mansion, or manor house. They did it. By the end of the summer, the first summer that they were there, they had built the complete first floor of it, which had the kitchen. It was a wood-heated kitchen, had wood-heated stove for cooking on, and so on and so forth. While they were building this house, they were living in the camper on the property. And any supplies they needed, they would go to the town to get. Now, this is a small town in the rural South. And you have two openly gay men who were not born and raised anywhere near that town. They were the quintessential outsiders. So you can imagine the reception that they got from some of the people there. You might be surprised by some of the reception they got there. Now, the general town folk and the bulk of the people who live there actually welcomed them with open arms. They were incredibly friendly to them and helped them get whatever they needed to help build and to help live out there in the Chattooga County woods. And I'm saying now what they ran into a problem with in the town proper was the local sheriff. And we'll get into that a little bit later. Because it's bad. It's really bad. The local sheriff was he was not as welcoming as he should be. And let me stop right there. When the local sheriff realized that he was dealing with an outsider couple that happened to be gay, he constantly tried to bring them up on various morality charges, religious charges, you name it. He constantly tried having them charged, and for numerous imaginary crimes that he made up. And the judge in the town, every time he'd come in, the judge would throw it out. But the sheriff would continually harass this couple with his interpretation of the law. So you can imagine how they felt about him. Now, when they first came, Dr. Scudder and Mr. Odom, when they first came to the location to where they were going to build their new house, their new off-the-grid house, they were just in awe of this old-growth forest that they were standing in the hills of Chattooga County. old giant gray oak trees, and they decided to call it Corpsewood, and they named the house that they were building. I'm saying it was a house. It was more like a small mansion that they were building. They called it Corpsewood Manor. Now the road. Now to get back to where they were building this house, I don't want to forget. You've got to hear this part. Um, it was off-road travel. They had the equivalent of a logging road that led back deep, deep, deep into the hills and into the forest to get to their property. And they would have to leave off that logging road. Um, and it took them an extra hour to get back to where they were building their house at. So they truly cut themselves off from civilization because they were seeking this simple, off the grid life, as opposed to the high society academic life, high art world that they came from in Chicago. So this was a complete difference, but this is what they wanted. This is what they wanted with their life. They sought this out. I know it sounds amazing. It's the perfect life. This is the kind of life we live here on my farm. We're not completely off the grid, but we're 95 to 98% self-sustainable here on the farm. So I understand the need to get away from civilization and live a quiet and simple life like Dr. Scudder and Mr. Odom wanted to live. Um, it kind of resonates with me. Their story resonates with me, really. I mean, completely. That's what, and you'll understand later why I say that. We'll get to that. It won't be a story for another time. It'll be a story for tonight. Now, just to describe the house they were building a little bit. Um, the house they were building was the walls were nearly 2 feet thick with brick, and they would leave space in between the layers of brick, which would give insulation to the house itself, having this air pocket between the layers of brick. Now, this method I found fascinating because that was actually, which made perfect sense considering Dr. Scudder's academic background, that I'll drink anyway. You should. Yes. Drink. Um, some of the older medieval castles that were built in Europe were built with this method. That when the great stones were done, they were placed, the great blocks of stone that were placed to build the walls of the castle, the living quarters of the castle, and the daily life quarters of the castle. That they were in between the bricks, they had a space, an airspace. So it was a very old um, and true method of insulating one's house, and I found it fascinating that they chose to do that. Again, these two gentlemen were building this house by themselves, laying every brick, every stone, every piece of wood by hand. And by the end of the first summer they were there, they had completed the first floor, um, installed the wood heating, wood cooking area. Um, by the end of the year, they had the second and third floor. The second floor was the living quarters, which also had places where they would store. Now, they were also growing their own food as well. And Dr. Scudder could not live without his wine. So one of the things he always wanted to do was make his own wine. So he had a vineyard. He grew a number of grapevines behind his property, as well as chicken coops and pens for animals in which they would get milk, eggs, you name it, use the animals themselves for food, plus a huge garden area as well. But they used the second floor both for a living space and also storage for the canned food and a pantry and larder for the food that they could have it throughout the winter, um, which I thought was fascinating. Now, on the third floor that they built, that was their party floor they built. They titled it the third floor of the manor, the Pink Room. That's what they called it. That's where they housed their pornography collection. That's where they kept. It's where they went to drink from the wine that they made there, and where they entertained at. And when I mean entertain, I mean they would have parties there. Um, but rumor had it they would have orgies as well. Just not the gay orgies. Everybody was invited. No, they didn't discriminate with anybody. Everybody came there. They knew they came. Everybody who came there to party came there to have a good time. Um, because these two gentlemen that were building this house and building this life there in the hills of Chattooga County, they were fun-loving people. They were absolutely fun-loving. They bore no ill will towards anyone. They wanted people to enjoy their life as much as they enjoyed it, and enjoy their vision of life as much as they enjoyed it. So when you came there and partied and you went to the Pink Room, um, they wanted you to enjoy yourself, you know, and have fun. And they loved entertaining naturally. Now, on the second floor, like I said before, was their living quarters, but there was also a library there as well. And we'll talk more about that library later. It housed many, many, many academic books, but it also housed some more intriguing items. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. Now, again, the couple, again, Dr. Scudder and Mr. Odom, they bore no ill will towards anybody in the town. And it was, everything was completed by 1976, 1977. They had everything completed. And by that time, a lot of the locals knew about them, knew that they were there, welcomed them or ignored them depending on who they were. Now, they owned some of the property, the 40 acres that they were on, the property that they owned was really prime hunting property, deer hunting, um, small game hunting, large game hunting. Um, and there was also a brook towards the bottom of the hills that, they could trout fish at as well. So they allowed many of the locals to hunt on that property. And and the people on the property got to know the couple really, really well. And most of them were rather quite fond of them and quite grateful if they allowed them to do it. So much so that they would, if they killed a deer, they would actually share parts of the deer, parts of their kill, with this couple as a way of paying them back. Because they never asked for, they never asked for money for them to hunt on their property. They let them do it as long as they did it safely and sanely, and didn't damage anything around the house. They were allowed to do it. They were very open about that, because they knew that it would spread goodwill throughout the town, and it did. For the most part, it did spread goodwill. People had good things to say about them because of them letting them do that. Because trust me, when you own a large tract of property like I do here on the farm, um, my farm's dangerous, number one. I don't allow people to hunt on the property because our woods are dangerous for various and sundry reasons. So I don't want anybody to ever go out there. Um, Number one, I don't want them to be harmed physically or psychologically or spiritually. But I also don't want them to stir up any trouble that might come back to my doorstep. So I don't have a lot of goodwill for the town that I live in, the town that's in my area here, because I don't let anybody hunt on my property. We have a huge hunting community here around here. We do own some property though that we allow what we make available in the fall. We do hunting, guided hunting excursions. The property that we own, it's property we do that on is going towards the capital of Virginia, outside of Prince Edward County. It's called Rice, Virginia. That property. It's also known as the Low Grounds, locally speaking. But we do wounded warrior, wounded vets. We do guided hunting trips with them in the woods and make accommodations so they can hunt on that property safely. And we do that every year. So it's something that we always give back. We also do. We own that same property. We do wounded vet, wounded warrior gardens as well, where we create spaces and raise gardens for wounded vets to come and raise food for their family there too. So, and we don't charge them for any of this stuff at all. It's just us giving back and doing the right thing. That's what I taught my kids. Give back. Give back to the world. Give back to those who cannot. Do for those who cannot. Okay. Got a little off story there. You guys love me for that. But just to contrast the difference between attitudes, they went out of their way to try to create goodwill with the community by allowing them to hunt on the property. Well, unbeknownst to them, and again, during this entire time, they were constantly being harassed by the sheriff in the town. It's nice of you to say. Thank you. They're constantly, at this point, being harassed still by the sheriff nonstop. Now, some of the stuff that he said met with the right, I should say, wrong ears in the community, because there were some people in the community that did not care for Dr. Scudder and Mr. Odom in the least being there, primarily because they were gay, and also the fact that they thought that this couple was millionaires. That these two rich gay men came down to take over and corrupt their county. They didn't understand, though, that they didn't have any money at this point, so to speak. They invested everything in building this life there in the hills of Chattooga County, Georgia. They didn't realize that. That was their personal business, so they didn't share that with anybody. So, of course, what you don't share turns into rumors in small communities. So all sorts of rumors would spread about them because of things like that. Well, mostly being spread by the sheriff and a few of the locals there in the town. Negative things. Now, I believe it was 1982 that one of these hunters that they allowed on the property, he'd been there hunting with a friend of his and family members. He'd been allowed to come there and hunt on that property for quite some time. He'd been invited to several of the parties that the couple would have there at Corpsewood Manor. So he'd seen the inside of the house. He'd seen all across the property. It was, when Corpsewood Manor was finished, it was absolutely beautiful. This brick manor with stained glass windows, arbors, just all these beautiful, beautifully constructed outbuildings. It was done beautifully, absolutely beautiful. So he was under the impression that they were still millionaires. They were millionaires, that they had property and valuables, hidden away somewhere in the property. So one night, him and a friend of his got two other people, a young man, which I believe was a relative. The gentleman in question, his name was Avery Brock, if I remember his name correctly, Avery Brock. He got a friend of his to go along with the following scheme. They decided to break in they were going to break in, they were going to go to the manor, um, act like that they wanted to party, get inside the manor, and then rob Dr. Scudder and Mr. Odom, rob them, make them tell them where they keep their money and gold at. Seriously, that's what they thought. Avery Brock thought that they had stashes of money and gold and valuables all throughout the manor. Um, based mainly because of the rumors that were being spread by the sheriff there in town. Now, like I said, those two, Avery Brock leading them, he got his friend to go along with the thing because, unbeknownst to the other two people, they got to go along with their scheme. They didn't tell them this, but they intended on killing Dr. Scudder and Mr. Odom that night. After they got all the riches, they were going to, rob them and then kill them. But they didn't tell the other two what they were doing. And one of them was a young lady that they had go along with them. Now, when I first heard this, I couldn't help but think that this sounded so much like, it sounded a little bit like Charlie Manson when his family went out at the La Biancas and did what they did. It had that vibe to it to me when I heard the story. It sounded, again, it just gave me chills when I heard it. It just had that vibe to it. It had that kind of evil to it. So they did go there. They drove to the manor. And of course, Dr. Scudder and Mr. Odom, they invited them in. Shared the wine from their wine that Dr. Scudder had been making. And they partied for a while into the night. And you have to remember, there was no electricity to this house. So everything was done by candlelight, lantern light, and various other forms of non-electrical illumination. So you can imagine that it was both probably very eerie as well as very beautiful at night to be inside that building and to be inside that house, and the outside of it that was being lit by candles and lanterns as well. It was probably incredibly beautiful, but also incredibly eerie at the same time. At some point during the party, it turned violent very quickly. It turned violent. Avery Brock's friend went out and got a .22 rifle out of the truck and came back into the house with it. Shot Mr. Odom about 4 or 5 times and killed him. They tied up Dr. Scudder in his chair and tortured him, wanting to know where the riches were at, where they had hidden their money, where the gold was hidden at, where all their valuables were at. Now, they did have 2 very large mastiff dogs. I forgot to tell you all that part of the story. The couple had 2 large mastiff dogs. The dogs were asleep beside the hearth when they came back in with the gun, and those were the first things that he shot in the house were the dogs. He killed the dogs. Then he killed Mr. Odom. Then they tied up Dr. Scudder and proceeded to torture him. And he kept telling them, I don't know. I don't have any of this stuff. Now, Avery Brock and his friend, they were doing this, okay? The 2 that they had brought along with them to help them did not know that murder was going to happen that night, that it was going to get that serious. They actually, when this started happening, they ran out of the manor. They ran out of the manor and tried to jump up in the vehicle they came in, and the vehicle wouldn't start. It wouldn't start. Now, it ran fine up to that point, but when the murder and mayhem began, this car would not start. The truck they drove would not start. So they had to go back inside the house to tell them what was going on with the vehicle. By that time, though, Avery Brock had gotten so frustrated with Dr. Scudder not telling him where the stuff was at. And the whole time that he was torturing Dr. Scudder, his partner was ripping up the house trying to find stuff, trying to find the valuables, trying to find the hidden gold, trying to find where they hid their money at, and was coming up with nothing. Um, One of the things that his partner did find out while he was tearing up the house was on the second floor there was that library I told you about that they had put together. And in that library, again, lots of academic books, naturally, books on academia, various subjects, literature, studies, you name it, the sciences, you name it. But that gentleman also found a um, a very large amount of books on the occult sciences and on rituals on occult sciences, um, as well as a large. It was a large wooden chest that he broke the lock on and looked inside of it and quickly closed it because of what he saw inside of it. And I will tell you later what that was, what that gentleman had found inside that wooden chest in the library. Trust me, it's worth the wait. When his friend came back, Avery Brock had gotten frustrated with Dr. Scudder up to that point, and he shot him in the head and killed him right then and there. Um, that's when panic. And he said, "Did you find, did you find the riches? Did you find the gold? Did you find the money? Did you find anything valuable at all?" He said, "Well, the only thing I found, they have is that harp they have on the third floor because, like I said earlier, Dr. Scudder was an incredibly accomplished harpist. Um, the Chicago Symphony actually invited him to play his harp at several of their performances. I mean, he was well known, well accomplished with the harp. We're talking about a full-sized harp, a big monster of a harp, and they actually tried to get it out of the house, but were not able to load it up in any vehicle to go because by that time, the two that had gotten to come along to go along with their scheme, with them not understanding that of the murder and mayhem that was about to happen, they came in and told them that the vehicle wasn't working, and they found the keys to Dr. Scudder's truck and to their camper. Um, and they fled in that. And we're going to pause right there because we're going to get back to their story in a minute about were they caught, what happened to them, to the murders, what happened to the two that came along who did not realize what was going to happen that night, but came along anyway. Well, we'll pause right there because they fled. They fled the state. They wanted to flee the state. The two that were involved in the murders, that did the murders, they wanted to flee the state, of course. Um, and they ended up fleeing in separate directions. One going to another part of Georgia. Another one, I think it was Avery Brock, that was going to that was heading towards Mississippi. Avery Brock, this is a side note, when he was fleeing, he actually killed. Oh God, I can't think of his rank, but he was in the military. He stole his truck and killed the man for his truck to flee with once they came out of the hills and started getting back to civilization. So I guess you figure, I've killed one man, killing another man wouldn't be, it's not that big of a deal. He was at that point he was probably becoming accustomed to killing people. Well, several days later, after those two fled, uh, the people from the town had not heard anything from Dr. Scudder or Mr. Odom, and they'd always hear something. If not every day, every other day, they would come down to get something, or they would come up to visit them. Well, some of the townsfolk came up here to see them to make sure they were okay, and when they went into the house, they saw, the decomposing body of the two dogs, Mr. Odom, and Dr. Scudder, and saw that the house had been trashed. So they got the sheriff involved. They got the sheriff to come up here to see what, to investigate about what had happened. So the sheriff, and this is where it gets even uglier, if you can believe it at this point. It's about to get a lot uglier, okay? Warning everybody, it's going to get a lot uglier with what I'm about to tell you, with what the sheriff did when he came there and when he was told that this couple had been killed and they were just found inside their house dead. He came there and he took it upon himself to, during the course of his investigation, to ransack the house. This was the sheriff, mind you. Remember, the sheriff had no love for them at all. The sheriff constantly um, tried to arrest them or accuse them of breaking various and sundry laws. And of course, the judge in the town would never buy any of it and wouldn't let, would not follow through with any prosecutions of anything that the sheriff would say or do. Would try to bring up on this couple. He went to the library. Remember me telling you about that chest that Avery Brock's friend had found and opened and fled the room as soon as he opened the chest and saw what was in it. Well, the sheriff went in there, and of course he saw the books, the occult books, the books on the occult sciences and occult studies. But he saw the chest, and he saw the lock that was broken on the chest, so he opened up the chest. Inside the chest, they found 3 human skulls. And they were authentic human skulls. They were old human skulls, ancient human skulls. They were runic human skulls. When I use the word runic skull, just as a side note, just to explain to you what a runic skull is. A runic skull is just what it sounds like. Is exactly what it sounds like. It's a human skull that has been cleaned and bleached, and around the skull there have been various symbols and runes, symbols, magical formulas, alchemical formulas would be carved in the skull, all around the skull, covering the skull. And there were 3 skulls that were like that. 3 runic skulls that he found. So he, when he left, and of course the townspeople and the press especially, he went to the press, and he told the townspeople that, and I quote, that one of those devil worshipping, Satan worshipping queers had a party that got out of hand and out of control. So this was something that they did to themselves. That's exactly how he did it. He had no intention of investigating what had happened to this couple in that house. Oh, and he also found in there as well, you have to remember during the 70s, LSD was the party drug in the 70s, for those who didn't know. Everybody wanted to expand their mind with LSD. Fuck, I did LSD, for God's sakes. Amongst other things. But that's a story for another time. He had found vials of what was considered to be LSD up there as well. He used that against them to malign them to the press. Because by this time, word had spread outside of the county, all through Georgia, about what had happened there in the hills. The murders that took place in the hills. And they were starting to get statewide attention, as well as it was beginning to slowly get national attention to what happened there. Now, you remember me telling you about the couple at the same time. Now, all this was happening at the same time. That this corrupt sheriff was spreading all of these rumors, made up rumors, stuff that he saw, stuff he made up, to pretty much explain what happened to this couple. That it was their fault about what had happened to them. Now, the 2 people, the young man and the young lady that were with Avery Brock and his partner, come to find out, when they fled from Corpsewood Manor, they actually went to the young lady's mother's house and held everybody in that house hostage. They hid there in that house for a few days before they they continued to flee, um, and pretty much scared them and threatened everybody in that house with death if they said anything. Well, when Avery Brock and his partner finally left the house, when they thought the heat was beginning to get turned up on them, which at this time it wasn't. Uh, that's when they started fleeing and tried to flee the state. The other couple, and the young lady especially, they went to the sheriff and they went to the media to tell exactly what had happened and said that they would cooperate um, with their part in what happened there. Well, of course, that blew everything, all the lies and bullshit that the sheriff had said and done out of the water. So he actually had to be a man of the law and of law enforcement once these two both came to the media and to him to say what had really happened at Corpsewood Manor that night, and that the two people and why they got killed and who did it. So they started a manhunt, statewide manhunt. Um, what ended up happening was that Avery Brock and his partner, they had separated and went their separate ways to keep the cops off of them. They were scared because they were beginning to see more and more attention statewide, more and more attention nationwide. It was showing up on the news feeds and news channels and the newspapers about what they did. Their names started appearing as the culprits of what had happened, as the suspects and culprits of what had happened. They're the ones that killed this couple. And they eventually turned themselves in. They pled guilty. Now, the couple that they had with them, they were not directly involved in the murders. They agreed to testify, and they were not giving any prison time at all for their testimony. Now, the other two got life in prison. Avery Brock's partner ended up getting sent to a medical facility, a jail, a prison that held prisoners that had medical issues. He eventually died there, and right now Avery Brock is still alive in prison, still living out his life sentence in prison, which is good. I'm happy to say. Let's get back to our old friend the sheriff. In the meantime, he had already started these rumors, referring to them as Satan worshiping queers who deserved what they got, and he trotted out the skull and showed them for everybody to take pictures of and say they were Satan worshippers, they were devil worshippers, and he showed all the books, the pictures of the books and everything on the occult, and all the LSD that they had there as well. And slowly but surely, legends started to rise about Satan, them being Satan worshippers, and even to the point where people believe that they were part of the Church of Satan as well. They were members of the Church of Satan. None of this can be proven. Okay, number one, none of this can be proven. Most of it was made up by our dear sheriff. And some of the rumors took hold and became legends in that town and in the surrounding counties as well. They actually call the hill that they built their manor on, of Corpsewood Manor on, they called it Satan Worshipper Hill. And it... Before I go much further, let me tell you how they disposed of the bodies of Dr. Odom and his partner. Well, Dr. Scudder and Mr. Odom. They were both cremated. Mr. Odom's ashes were actually scattered in and around Corpsewood Manor. Dr. Scudder, his sister actually took, I believe it was his sister, actually took his ashes back to be placed in a grave site, a family grave site. Now, their families, both of their families, extended families, wanted nothing to do with Corpsewood Manor. Um, the land and the manor was sold in less than a year after their deaths. Nobody else, by a private owner, nobody else moved into Corpsewood Manor. Corpsewood Manor was left there to decay and to fall apart, and it did. There was actually, it became the spot after our dear sheriff started the rumors that he started. Um, a lot of the teenagers in the town and in the local counties would come to this haunted, dark location. Um, of course, to drink, fornicate, and raise hell and scare their girlfriends when they went there. It's believed that it was a group of teens like this that had started one of the fires there at Corpsewood Manor and burnt down a large portion of the manor house. Over the years, it continued to fall apart and to fall into disrepair. Even though, again, somebody had bought it, they didn't try to repair it. They bought the land, they bought the house, and they didn't try to repair it. They left it everything there as a monument, I think, as to of what happened there, as a reminder to everybody about what happened there. Like I said, the new owners never moved in there. The new owners never did anything with it. Now, how did everybody's favorite naked Bigfoot get involved in this this story? Well, I'm sorry, but tonight's episode is going to go a little bit long, guys. So I hope you can stick with me here. It's not going to get much longer, but it's going to go a little bit longer. Um, I was heading north out of Athens, Georgia at the time. This was in the early 90s. I had, just recently dealt with the werewolf boy, and in some of my past episodes, I tell the story of the supposed werewolf boy that was there. Um, and I had heard the stories being told um, about Corpsewood Manor. Now, Corpsewood Manor, since it is privately owned, it was privately owned, it's still privately owned. Um, but the owners don't mind having people come there to visit it and take pictures, as long as you're respectful and you don't destroy it any further. Um, that's the only thing they ask is you don't do. So there's people going out there all the time, true crime buffs, paranormal investigators, all kind of local paranormal investigators. They love going out there. I had heard the true story that I had just finished relating to everybody, but I had also heard the paranormal story involved with it. And you see, I was always curious when I would hear legends like I'm about to tell you, and I would always, as everybody well knows, when I would hear a legend or a story or a folk tale, I'd have to go investigate it and find out on my own if it was true or not. So I did go to Chattooga County, uh, went to the local newspaper, looked up the stories about what had happened at Corpsewood Manor, which is what I related to you in a slightly abbreviated fashion tonight. Talked to some of the locals who were around at the time that it had happened, and the one thing the locals would always say was they would always tell me the rumors, the stories about how when they were killed, um, the devil came there, Satan came to Corpsewood Manor to mourn the death of his most beloved acolytes. That he always visited the manor. He walked on the inside of the manor. He walked the grounds. And since Satan was incapable of shedding tears, um, that he would weep quietly and dryly over the death of his followers. and that the spirits of the two gentlemen that were murdered there still were there. They did not walk the property as we would think as a typical ghost would do, but instead their spirits were infused in the walls and in the foundation of the house that they built themselves and they loved so much. Their spirits were infused and forever trapped in the stones of that house. Of course, I hear something like that, and I've got to go investigate it. So, I took the old logging road, which still existed and still exists from what I understand, and got off that road once I got back so far from civilization, and I actually passed a number of cars that were leaving that area. People had gone up there and visited. Now I was getting late in the evening. Here comes smart me. I'm going to go do it again, and I go there. Now it got to the point you could only drive so far off the logging trail before you got to a point where the road was no longer a road. You'd have to hike in. So I went about 45 minutes into the road, and then I had to hike an additional hour to get to the ruins of Corpsewood Manor. Most of the walls were still there. It was overgrown with vegetation. The first and second floors had collapsed. All these stone and brick outbuildings were still there in some fashion, if not the walls themselves were still there. The foundation was still there. The remains of their gardens, the remains of their vineyard was still there. It was eerily and hauntingly beautiful. Now, I was there when the sun was going down, so. But there was a couple there, and it was a local couple, two young people that were there. I'm assuming they were boyfriend, girlfriend that were there. And they were the only ones left there when I went there. I was walking around. And they looked at me and said, and I of course asked them, tell me why you're here. What's going on here? What is this place? So they tell me, the legends of Corpsewood Manor. And some of it rang with the stories and some of the rumors that were started, of course, by the sheriff that had evolved over the decades. But one thing that they said to me was similar to what I had heard in the town. They said, whatever you do, don't touch the walls or take anything, any stones from the walls whatsoever. And I said, why? They said, because their spirits are still in the stones and the walls of the house here. And if you take it, you'll be cursed by Satan. You'll be cursed by the devil. And of course, as everybody well knows, what the naked Bigfoot thinks about the devil. And of course, I pshawed, danger be damned. I'm not afraid of anything. Ugh, that was a stupid way to be, trust me. And you'll find out about that in a minute. That was really fucking stupid. And I said, well, what does this curse involve exactly? That the satanic curse involved. He said, if you take that, Satan is going to make you relive their deaths over and over and over again. You'll never find any peace if you take anything from here. And of course, I had a good laugh. They had a good laugh about it. But I was laughing for real, and they had this nervous chuckle. Like, it ain't funny, dumbass. We done warned you. So by that time, they left. I heard them trekking back through the woods, heading back to where they were parked at. I walked the grounds and walked inside the house, and the entire time I was there, if I didn't feel alone, it felt so sad. When I walked through there, when the sun started going down, the energy changed. It was so sad. It got to the point I could smell I could smell gunpowder in spots. When I was walking through the ruins of this house, I swear that at some points I heard someone, I don't know if it was within my head or happening around me, but I heard somebody screaming, "No, no, no," and I heard a faint crack of a gun. And of course, I started thinking to myself, there might be something to what those kids were telling me. And it was getting dark. It was already dark. It was starting to get cold because this was in October that I was there. Um, again, in the early 90s. It was getting cold up there on the side of a hill. I got really weak when I was walking through there. It's like all the energy drained through my legs into the ground. And I sat on some of the foundation stones that were around what used to be the front entrance to Corpsewood Manor. I sat down on those stones. And I had never been so cold in my life. It went from October, cold, to I think I just sat on a block of ice. It was so cold it hurt. It inside. I was started shaking from the point where it made my chest and I was shaking so badly and my teeth were chattering so hard that my jaw began to hurt and that my joints and my chest began to hurt from shaking so bad from the cold. And I pushed myself up, and when I pushed myself up, a piece of the foundation stone came off in my hand. And I looked at it, and it was like holding a hailstone. It was so cold, so very cold. And again, my body, I'm shaking all over from this cold. But I have this death grip on this piece of this foundation from the property. And I stick it in my pocket. And I make my way off the property. Now, as soon as I stepped off the property back onto the trail leading back down to the road, I stopped shaking. But at that point, my body hurt from head to toe, from shaking so badly, from being there, from being that cold there. And I had this, but the stone was still cold. It was in my pocket. It was like I had an ice cube in my pocket. And I remember the kids telling me not to take anything from there. That I should never take anything from there. That it's cursed. Any object you take from there is cursed. You would have to relive their deaths. The devil would make sure you relive their deaths 1,000 times over, as long as you held on to anything that came from that house. Because he was mad because you took that away. And their souls still dwelt within that foundation. Naturally, at the time, I thought I had something completely fascinating at the time. Um, I said, well, you know what? I'm going to hold on to this and see what happens and see what goes on with the stone. Well, it didn't happen the first night. It didn't happen the second night. It didn't happen the third night. It was about 15 days later that I had the stone in my backpack with me. Of course, where I stored all my gear and all the crazy shit that I collected. And I was rummaging through it. I had left the town. I'd been out of that town for quite some time, and I was actually heading towards Florida. I should tell some of my Florida stories, but that's a story for another. Those are stories for another time. My Florida stories, paranormal stories and supernatural stories are fascinating. Scary as shit, but fascinating. But those will have to be stories for another time. And I was rummaging through my backpack at a hotel, right when I was reaching the northwestern tip going into Florida. And I was at a hotel, and I was going through my backpack, and the stone fell out of my backpack. I had nearly forgot that I had this damn thing with me, and it fell out on the bed. And I said, "Oh shit, that's that foundation stone that I got there." And I didn't think any of it. I didn't stick it back in my backpack. Instead, I put it on the nightstand beside my bed, um, and went to sleep like nothing had happened. Well, that's when something finally did happen. That night, um, I had. You've heard me talk about phantasmagoria before, but phantasmagoria is a dream state to where you're standing where something terrible has happened and you're having to pay witness to it while it's happening. And I dreamt that I was in that house at the time of the murders, that I was standing there. I was standing in front of the cook stove in the kitchen when Avery Brock's friend came back in with a .22 rifle and shot Mr. Odom 4 times in the chest. And I watched that when it happened. I felt blood, spatter up onto my face because I was standing that close to him when it happened. Flash forward. I heard Dr. Scudder screaming, and then I heard a single gunshot. And I wasn't in the room. I was still in the kitchen, but I heard when it happened. And then that's when everything in the house, all the light in the house went out and it got pitch black. And I heard these two voices saying at different points and different times, "Why did you let him kill us? Why did you let him kill us?" And I could smell smoke, but it wasn't from a wood fire. It was the fire that happened later after their deaths that was set at that house. And then suddenly there was light, but the light came from the fire, and the fire was raging across the ceiling towards me. The heat hit me in the face, and that's when I woke up. When the heat hit me in the face, I woke up drenched in sweat, panting, out of breath, burning up in the bed. Now, this was not the last time that I would experience, and it was the same, and I experienced it. That same experience, that same thing happened in my dreams. Happened for the next 30 nights until I was able to actually hook up with one of my hoodoo connects that I had. And they made me a bag, helped me make a bag to seal the stone off with. And I keep this stone in that bag now inside of the black cabinet. Now, I took the stone out today. Now, I intend on putting the stone back and sealing it away before I go to bed tonight, because I don't intend on having these dreams like I had there for 30 days straight, for 30 nights straight, that I had, that the stone was causing, because they're some part of their spirit, some part of their death has soaked into the foundation, has soaked into the stones of Corpsewood Manor. And I took a piece of it. And of course, I was cursed. I don't think I was cursed by Satan. And I don't see it as the curse that the locals talked about. There is and I'm only going to touch on this briefly, and I can talk about later in a different show. There's the stone tell theory that stones absorb, sounds. They absorb, trauma, emotions all around them, and that there are people that can access these sounds, I can access these emotions, I can access these scenes with these stones. I'm not sure if this is stone tell. I kind of suspect that this is their spirits again, that penetrated these stones. The energy from their death um, infused itself within the foundation and within the walls of this manor, which they loved so very much. And they put so much of their life into building, so much of their love into building, that their death saturated the stones and overcame a lot of the love that built that place. And that anybody who comes in contact with it is going to experience that death for as long as they're in contact with it. And in my case, it's been a few decades, but I've been able to keep it locked away and keep it under control all this time. And for those who, on Twitter, I gave a little sneak preview of what the stone looks like. But I'll show those who have not seen that yet. So hold tight, and I'll show you the stone. Whee! That's the stone. Piece of the foundation. Fuck. That hurt. Piece of the foundation. And before I end tonight's tale, I'll just, of course, end it with this warning. Sometimes you may be tempted to take a souvenir from a famous or infamous location, so you can tell friends what it is, or keep it on your mantle on display to, inspire people who look at it, so you can tell the story about it, that you got that there. For example, people, you're told by the locals in Hawaii not to take any of the volcanic rocks home with you. That if you do, you will incur the wrath of Pele and the spirits of the ancestors of the Hawaiian people, and you will be stricken with bad luck, accumulating bad luck, until you return the stone back to the islands. Only then will the curse of the bad luck will be lifted. The same is true with a lot of objects at a lot of locations where great tragedy has occurred. So, if you visit a place like this out of curiosity, you should take only your curiosity. You should take only pictures. But you should never, ever take anything else from there, because you don't know what you're bringing home with you when you do that. I want to thank everybody for tuning in tonight's episode of What the Fuck Paranormal Chat with the Naked Bigfoot. I am your host, the Naked Bigfoot, Mike the Naked Bigfoot, wishing everybody a good night and pleasant dreams.